So here's our graph. You should have graphed this already. And once again, what do you notice? What type of correlation do we see here? Generally speaking, from moving left to right, our graph is definitely increasing. So once again, we would classify this as having a positive correlation. This definitely has a positive correlation because as we move from left to right, we are increasing. But let's practice putting this into words. Let's practice putting this into the words. I am not a big fan of, like I said, the way they set this up. It really should be temperature as X and water as Y. So think about that for a minute. When do you think you drink more water? In the middle of the summer or in the middle of the winter? When do you think we're using more water as far as drinking water, as far as um, the amount of water we're using outside to water our lawns and that type of thing? It should make sense to you that the higher the temperature is, the more water we're going to use. So that's kind of our conclusion that as the temperature, what? As the temperature increases, right? As the temperature increases, the water consumption, the water consumption also increases. So the goal of today is not only to identify whether it's positive or negative or no correlation, but it's also to really interpret what it's saying. You have to know what that correlation means in the context of the problem. So that's our main component today. So if that doesn't make sense to you, please talk it over with a neighbor, talk it over with Ms. Smith, and see if you can try to determine why or what correlation is really saying in the context of what we're talking about here. So the last part here is to really practice, not necessarily graphing these, but trying to think whether this has a positive or negative or no correlation whatsoever in the context of what the question is saying. So what I want you to do is I want you to press pause on the video and then try to answer all of these with a positive, negative, or no correlation. And then I'll come back and let you know how you did. So go ahead and press pause and we'll go from there. All right, so this first one is the number of hours a person has driven and the number of miles they've driven. So there's definitely a positive correlation here because you basically, if you drive, you're going to increase the number of miles. If you're in the car, you increase the number of miles. The only maybe example where this isn't true is if you're in gridlock traffic and you're hours of driving, but you're not going anywhere. So there are some outliers, is what we call those. Those would be an outlier, but overall, it's definitely positive. Or how about the number of siblings a student has and the grade they have in the class? Really, this shouldn't make any difference. You can have a bunch of siblings, you can have no siblings, and you can really still have a decent grade or a bad grade in the class. So there's no correlation here at all. The age of a car and its value. So you guys may not know this yet, but the older your car is, the less of a value it has. So that would be a negative correlation because as the age of my car goes up, the value of my car is going down. Number 11, the number of weeks a CD has been out in the total sales. This is kind of old for you guys because none of you probably buy CDs. You guys are all streaming everything. But when CDs were released, and they still are, but when they were released originally in their only form, then you have to think about the fact that people are at the very beginning, the obviously the CD has just come out, so not that many CDs have been sold. But then as time goes on, more and more and more and more people buy the CDs. The total CD sales can't go down. It can stay flat if no one else is buying them, but it really can't go down at all because it's total sales. So the longer it's been out, hopefully the more that we're selling, that is a positive correlation. The more time that passes, the more CDs that are going to sell. If that one doesn't make sense, talk to Mrs. Smith about it, talk to your neighbors about it, see if you can kind of figure that one out. Number 12, the number of years a person went to school and their income. Now, this one's a little tricky because we definitely have some outliers. There are people who have gone to school way less time than myself, right? But make way more money than me. In general, though, you think about that. If you didn't even finish high school, your income's going to be pretty low. And then in general, if you get your master's degree, you get your PhD, and you go to school more and more, you typically will have a better and better job, which gives you a higher and higher salary. So overall, this is also positive because the more years you go to school, typically the higher your income will be. But there are definitely some outliers here. That means there are definitely some ones that kind of don't fit the mold and would be different. Okay, number 13. Once again, maybe you don't have an iPod, maybe you're only streaming, so this doesn't make sense again. But I remember having an iPod and I could only have a certain number of songs on my iPod because there was only a certain amount of memory available. So for you guys, it might be that you run out of storage because you're taking so many selfies, God knows. But in this case, it's the number of songs you have downloaded on your iPod and the amount of memory you have available. So think about that. The more songs you download, or maybe the more selfies you take, what happens to your memory? The memory on your phone or your iPod goes down. That's your storage space goes down. So that is definitely a negative correlation. So you have a negative correlation there. All right, last two here. The amount of time spent on the computer, instant messaging, maybe aka texting your friends, and the number of computers you have in your house. Once again, we probably need to update these. You guys probably don't instant message on your computer, but the idea here is that the more computers you have in your house, the more time you can spend sending text messages or instant messaging. So that would be a positive relationship. Okay. Um, but you could make a, I really think you could make an argument for no correlation there as well. It kind of depends. If you have nobody fighting you for the computer in your house, then you may not, you may be able to take as long as you want as well. All right, the last one here, the age of a house and the number of people living in the house. Is there any connection between how old your house is and the number of people you have living there? There really isn't. You can have a massive house with two people living in it. You can have a tiny house with, 5, 6 people living in it. So really, in this case, there shouldn't be any definitive correlation between the age of a house and how many people are living in it. So talk those over. If any of those don't quite make sense to you, because this is kind of a mental battle here. If any of those don't quite make sense, please ask Miss Smith, talk it over with your classmates, and just kind of talk it over. See if you can make sense of it. Keep working, and best of luck to you.